This one. So each one of you have done this section. Can you see the slide? Can you see? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you are doing this, you can as well, you seeing the slide, all of you people can actually, those who have taken each part of it, you can further refine them in the light of what I have presented now. Most of you people have talked to me. A couple of people who have not talked to me, they can always give their views. Question gentleman has talked. Comparison groups, study design person, I have not talked to me. Inclusion, yes. Exclusion, yes. Baseline measurements, yes. Follow up, yes. Outcome, yes. Performa, yes. Data recording, also, yes. Clinical significance, also, yes. Statistical, clinical significance, I didn't give to anyone. That included under the statistical only, that way done. Analysis and reporting also. A couple of people have not responded, but doesn't matter. But you develop. Somebody has put a message saying that there is a lot of difference between inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. Let us see what is that message. I just saw one WhatsApp message saying that. Exclusion criteria, chronic disease, drastic change in height, weight in children, following conditions excluded. Oh, he has just written it again and he has read more. Okay, that is okay with whatever we have discussed. And you don't have to think too much about achondroplasia and Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome. You don't get so many people like that. You can say any other chronic condition, genetic condition can be excluded. You don't have to spell out all the genetic conditions like starting from sphingomyelin and then starting from Gaucher's disease, Niemann-Pick's disease, and all the pediatric illnesses. It's okay. You can say those diseases, chronic illnesses which have a bearing on the on the which have a bearing on the weight and height in the children will be excluded. And what are they? Exemplify a few. Common things are liver disease, renal disease, heart disease, malabsorption, diarrhea, lactose intolerance, any other neurological and genetic diseases also you would like to exclude. PG students, you are like our children. Please feel free and then take the mic and any area which you have not understood. See, right from relative risk, odds ratio, attributable risk, specificity, sensitivity, likelihood ratios, sample size calculation, p value, and then test of significance, and any area of your choice. Please take up a question and then give me the 1 2 minutes. Tell me the question immediately. I will support you with a slide or presentation.
Sir,
What will be the question you would like to ask in dengue fever? Dengue is a big area, isn't it? You want to
sir,
look at the virology part, the antigen testing part, or the investigation part, or the complications part, or the fatality part. What do you wanted to actually think about?
sir, I just want to know the investigation part, sir.
Wanted to know
Investigation part regarding serology, sir.
serology,
Antigen, sir.
antigen testing. So, okay, you wanted to do an antigen testing, NS1 antigen, how valuable it is, right?
Sir.
That is
But,
probably what you wanted to do,
but
if I understand.
how do we take the
No, I'll
case?
tell you. See, when you are doing an antigen test, there won't be a control group. It is a study of diagnostic test, isn't it? Then you will have a gold standard and your test. The goal, you will be comparing your test against a gold standard.
So it will be a prospective study, sir.
What you will do is you construct a gold standard. Those are confirmed dengue by NS1 antigen for immunology. You have platelets and you have got the bleeding and you have got all the features of dengue. That will be the gold standard, yes or no. Against that, you compare your NS1 antigen, test positive, test negative, workout sensitivity and specificity. Okay. So if you are looking at any diagnostic test, any one of you, if you are looking at a diagnostic test as your research question, then there won't be like a case group and control group and like that. It won't be like that. It will be the gold standard of that particular disease versus your test you are comparing. Okay. So what is the gold standard for the test? You have to decide. Suppose there is no gold standard for dengue. Then how do I know that a person has got really a dengue with surety? One, the antibodies must be positive. He must have a degree, increase in the PCV and decrease in the platelets, and there may be a rash, and there may be fibromyalgia complex. All put together, I will put them as dengue positive, and those who do not qualify for that, I will call them as dengue negative. And then look at the antigen test in those groups, two groups who are antigen positive, antigen negative. If you are looking at mortality or fatality or something, you can say mild cases of dengue, how many are recovering, how many are fatal, moderate cases, severe cases, test of proportions. Then you will be doing a chi-square and doing that. If you are looking at clinical manifestations, how well they are correlating with the outcome. So people who had low platelets, they had more mortality. People who had so increase in the PCV hemo concentration, they had more mortality. People who had albuminemia, hypoalbuminemia, they had more mortality. People who had liver enzymes elevated, they have more or less mortality. There are ways you can take something. I think what you have a good idea of doing something, and dengue, I'm very happy about it, a very common condition. So please get in touch with me one-to-one, and I will try to refine your idea, what you wanted to do. Then once we decide on the area of what you have to do in dengue, then we will tailor a proper question and start designing a study.
Okay.
Okay. Likewise, anybody else who wants to do any dissertation, it could be related to your dissertation also. You can just throw a preliminary idea here, and then we can always develop that preliminary idea. And whether it is researchable or not, I will tell you. What are the difficulties with that also, I will advise. And also remember, time and again, I am telling, this interaction with me is not just for the 6 days. It is going to be in as long as you are in GEMS or afterwards also. So keep my number and mail ID, and then anytime you have anything, you just message me, either call me. Then if not suitable time, I'll tell you to call at a particular time and we can discuss. As far as science is concerned, helping you is concerned, I am ever open to you.
Hello, sir. Two students, they want to know about likelihood ratio.
Likelihood ratio. You wanted to know about likelihood ratio?
Two students, they gave the same.
Very good. I will show you that presentation and explain you the likelihood ratio. Good that you have asked that question. Now, first of all, you must know how to calculate the sensitivity. Okay. What is sensitivity? So that is the number true positives divided by total disease people. True positives here. Can you see my slide?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you can see on this slide, true positives are 70, and total who are having disease in IDA, that is the iron deficiency anemia, are 90. So 70 of the people who have iron deficiency anemia by the gold standard are picked up by ferritin being less than 45 and are called positive. That is called the 70 by 90 is called the sensitivity of the test. Isn't it? Direction of inquiry is downward. The 70 here is the true positives who are having both the disease and the test positive. Among those who are really having the disease by the gold standard, 90, 70 by 90 are A by C. This can be written as A, and this can be written as A plus C. So sorry, A plus C. So A by A plus C. If you go to the previous slide, you will see that A by A plus C there. And anyway, I am just... So that is A by A plus C is the sensitivity. That's what I'm saying. 70 by 90 is the sensitivity. So first obtain the sensitivity. Then what you do? You also obtain the specificity. What is the specificity? Specificity is they are truly negative people. These are the true negatives because they do not have the disease and test also shed negative. How many are true negatives among the total really without disease? B plus D people, they do not have the disease, but the test classified D people have not having disease, true negatives by the column total B by D, B plus D. In other words, in this example, 130 by 145 is equal to the specificity. Remember, a specific test always confirms the disease. If the test is highly specific, if the test is positive, you are sure you are, confirming the disease. The best example is finding tubercle bacilli on the slide is highly specific for tuberculosis. Supposing I don't find tubercle bacilli, I cannot exclude the disease because the sensitivity of the test is lower. A sensitive test can rule out the disease. A specific test, if it is positive, confirms the disease. A sensitive test is negative, it rules out the disease. A specific test, if positive, it confirms the disease. If you have a both, it is very good, but always difficult to have both a sensitive as well as specific test. In such a scenario, what do you do? I use one sensitive test and one specific test and combine them. For example, diagnosing pulmonary tuberculosis. I take an X-ray chest. X-ray chest is normal. That is, it is negative for the disease. Very unlikely that the fellow will have pulmonary tuberculosis, isn't it? With a normal X-ray chest, we can more or less rule out pulmonary tuberculosis. Very rarely endobronchial tuberculosis or something pleural or something may be there. But in general, pulmonary tuberculosis without an X-ray shadow, whatever nature, suspicious shadow will be definitely not tuberculosis. It's a sensitive test to exclude. But you combine that with a specific test of doing the sputum examination. Then what happens? Specific test is there to confirm. If I find the bacilli, it confirms it. You use a sensitive test and a specific test, a combination. That's why we write sputum examination, X-ray test. These two are used to rule out the disease and also confirm the disease. Remember, specific test if positive confirms the disease. Sensitive test if negative rules out the disease. Now what is the specificity here? True test negatives are 130, true without disease is 145, 130 by 145 is the specificity. So you have to obtain these two measures first. Okay, after having obtained that, then you have to go for the likelihood ratio. Positive likelihood ratio is equal to sensitivity divided by 1 minus specificity. In our example, we got the sensitivity as 0.78 and specificity as 0.9. So 0.78 divided by 1 minus 0.9. 1 minus 0.9 is 0.1, isn't it? 0.78 divided by 0.1 is 7.8. A positive likelihood ratio of 7.8 is very, very powerful. This probability of the patient having a true positive result rather than a false positive result. The probability of having a true positive result, if the patient is positive, it is quite high. If somebody is having low ferritin, that is a true positive result, the chances of iron deficiency anemia are quite high. That's what it says. It rules in the disease. Positive likelihood ratio rules in the disease. Okay, why I am using this? Why not sensitivity and specificity? Here, I am harnessing the power of sensitivity and specificity into one equation. I have factored in the sensitivity, I have factored in the specificity also to arrive at a positive result, positive likelihood ratio. Okay, both are used, so that it is much more robust measure rather than sensitivity alone or specificity alone. So what is negative likelihood ratio? So we just, instead of taking sensitivity divided by 1 minus specificity, we take 1 minus sensitivity divided by specificity, just the converse of it. 1 minus sensitivity by divided by specificity. 1 minus 0.78 in this example is 0.22, specificity is 0.9, 0.22 divided by 0.9 is 2.44. 2.44 is not as robust as this, not as robust as that. What does that mean? This is the probability of the patient having a true negative result rather than a false negative result. This probability is 2.4 times. It could be true negative result or it could be a false negative result also. The probability is 2.4 against the true negative result. That means the strength of the, the serum ferritin to rule out disease is rather less compared to the strength of it to confirm iron deficiency anemia. You understand? Now you have a ratio of both. So what is that? Is called the LR ratio, likelihood ratio. Likelihood ratio is you take the positive and the negative, and then that LR ratio is called the diagnostic odds ratio. If you were to do a diagnostic test evaluation, diagnostic odds ratio is a further summary measure because it uses the positive likelihood as well as negative likelihood, takes a wholesome view of that. So the rule of thumb is LR positive more than 10, it rules in the disease. LR positive less than 0.9 rules out the disease. LR positive between 0.5 and 0.2 little affects the patient's probability of any disease. I hope it is clear. The difference between sensitivity and specificity are there you are exclusively seeing the vertical and the vertically up here, vertically down there. Here in this, we are combining the power of this as well as the power of that into one summary measure, which is a positive likelihood ratio and a negative likelihood ratio. I hope it answers.
Yes, sir. Next question is regarding how to frame hypothesis, and second question related to it. Please throw some light on null hypothesis.
The first question, you please repeat. How to
frame the hypothesis.
How to
Frame
hypertension.
hypothesis.
How to generate a hypothesis? Please, can you type it out somewhere and then show it to me? One of you. See, it's not very, the GEMS mic is not that very audible, very clear.
We are sending WhatsApp photos.
Yeah, please do that. All of you do that. If you have a question, please do that. In the meantime, any other questions also, please do that. Please send in the WhatsApp. I'll be able to see and answer.
The next question is regarding sampling technique.
Sampling technique. Okay, I'll address the sampling technique part now before I get the other question. Okay. So there are the sampling is a method of trying to know about the whole without looking at the whole. What your mother does or you do when you cook rice, you don't see the entire the pot full of rice to check whether it is cooked or not. What you do? You take this one and see whether it is cooked or not by looking at 1 or 2 grains of a vegetable or rice or whatever. Likewise, I take 10 seconds recording of the ECG and try to imagine what is happening in the heart. What am I doing? I am sampling 10 beats and assuming this will be the same with the remaining beats. Isn't it? Sampling is a procedure always adopted in life also. You just, sample a bit and then we go to the sweet shop, he gives you a small bit and asks you to take it. You take it. Very nice. You buy half a kilo. So a sample, the drug representative gives you a sample to try. And the sample you use it and on 1 or 2 patients. And you are convinced and you try it on the patients. So sampling is a way of life. You cannot avoid sampling because you can't look at the whole. Nobody can look at the whole. So we always do sampling. So for example, you have sampled me in the last 1 week about the way which I teach. So using this sample, you can generalize and say, okay, this gentleman cannot do anything properly, or you can say can reasonably well, or whatever is there. So while doing that, we incur an error. Okay, this is called the sampling error. Sampling error depends upon the type of sampling. Supposing I wanted to select 10 subjects, and these 10 subjects for a particular lab evaluation, I want to test a new thing. If I pick up whoever is going, my attenders, 10 persons who are there and then do it, that is completely, those who are available, the accessibility bias will be there. Rather than picking up 10 people from the outpatient randomly or something like that. So what is called a random sampling. So random sampling means you have no idea whom you are going to choose by your mind. You just keep your mind, this one closed. There are 100 people. I wanted to sample 10, write all 1 to 10, 100 numbers. And these numbers are there in a box, in an urn, and then shake it well and pick up 10 chits. These 10 are selected out of the 100. There are 100 subjects, we wanted to select 10. How did I do it? The simple process of randomization, just like you pick up a lot, you take it out. That is called the simple randomization. There are random tables also are there. So for example, the random number table, if you go by the last digit. If the last digit is 4, anybody ending the registration number with 4 will go to as treatment 1. Next last digit is 7. Okay, the person gets 7, he goes to the second group. Next last digit in the random table is 1. So the person with the 1 ending 1, a mobile number or registration number, what it is, he will go to the other information. This is using a random table. Either you use a simple chits and randomization, or you use a random number tables, or today even much simpler. You just go to a random randomization website, and then you just type the patient's number, and then it automatically allocates them the first, second, third patient to whatever interventions you want. And you can computerize randomizations also can be done. This is at an individual level. So supposing in the study we said we cannot individually randomize the children to Horlicks or no Horlicks, because in the same household, if one child is getting Horlicks and other child is getting nothing, it is not feasible to execute that particular intervention. So we thought we will do household as the randomization. Then you have 100 households, you randomize 50 of them to one intervention, another 50 by then. What you do is number the households and keep the number 1 to 100, and then randomly you pick which will go to the using a random number table, or even taking all the lots also. This is called the household as a cluster randomization. Sometimes you may have to do studies in the population, not based on the households, but as a cluster. So I'll say, there are 10 streets or 20 streets in the village, and you number them as 1 to 20. All in street 1 will be randomized to one thing, street 2 to another one. We don't decide. The random number cells, street 1 will go to the intervention A, street 2 also it may go to intervention A, but ultimately when you complete the randomization, the 10 streets are divided into 5 and 5. Okay, this is called the cluster randomization. So simple randomization using random number tables, or your sort of picking up a lots like thing, or you have the household randomization or cluster randomization, and what is called the stratified randomization. Stratified randomization is you do that one factor is very powerfully associated with the outcome. For example, mortality in COVID is very strongly associated with male gender. So what I do is all my study subjects, 200 subjects who are going to be admitted, I a priori divide them into males and females as they come, and all men again are randomized to treatment A and treatment B. All women are randomized to treatment A and treatment B. So much so, at the first level itself, I have made sure that the very important factor which has got a bearing got equally distributed in both my this one. This is called the stratified randomization. So you can have 1 strata or 2 strata or 3 strata, multiple levels of randomizations also, you can do it. Or you have a larger sample, you randomize them into 2 halves, then look at how many women are there here, how many men, and then compare. Then they may be equal, they may not be equal, depending on the sample size you take. The larger the sample, the lesser will be the error, random sampling error, isn't it? If you check all the 50% of the rice in the pot that is being cooked, you are very sure that it is cooked, rather than taking 2 grains. If you monitor the Holter for 1 whole day, it will be more representative of the ECG of the person rather than 10-second sampling of the ECG that you record. Okay, so and always when you look for a longer time or look at larger number of the total whole, the random error will be coming down, but it will become cumbersome, it will be costlier, it will be time consuming. So you have to cut a sort of limit at which whether you will be reducing the error or you want to take more burden and do more sampling. Okay, so at 10% sampling, 20% sampling, 50% sampling, like that we do, depending on the intervention that we are doing. There are a few things about the sampling techniques, but a detailed review of sampling technique is itself a separate lecture. So probably we will see at some other point. Hope it answers. Okay. Now, please explain the final summary table of type 1 and type 2 error in relation to sensitivity and specificity. Sensitivity and specificity and type 1 and type 2 errors are 2 different things. Okay, sensitivity and specificity are related to the diagnostic test or the screening test. Type 1 and type 2 error are related to the statistical test of significance. So what you can do is, once you get a sensitivity, let us say 0.8 or 0.7, whatever it is, you can build a confidence interval around that. How to build the confidence interval? What is the 95% confidence interval of my sensitivity I measured? And if it is 0.7 is the answer, if it is plus minus 0.05, that means 0.65 or 0.75 could be the sensitivity variation. So that confidence intervals can be generated using a test of significance on the sensitivity and on the specificity. And we don't call them as type 1 and type 2 error there, but in fact, they are there in the background, but you do what is called the sensitivity analysis is another method. What is sensitivity analysis? The same example which we have just now taken, 45 is the ferritin cutoff value we took. Supposing I don't take 45, God has not told me 45 is the cutoff. So I can take 40 as the cutoff and see what is the sensitivity and specificity. Or I can say 50 as the cutoff and see the numbers, how they vary. If 50 is the cutoff, some positives will be coming down to the negatives, and 40 is the cutoff, some negatives will move on to the positive side. So the table gets rearranged by doing a little bit stretching this side and that side around that wonderful value of 45 in that example. Okay, then what you get is, you get one sensitivity for 50 as the cutoff, another for 45, another for 40, which is called a range of sensitivities will come. And you can pick up, supposing you change between 45 to 50 or 40, is not going to really change your sensitivity. So you can say in this range, it works. In this range, it is normal. In this, beyond this range, it is abnormal. That's how exactly your thyroid TSH value or your FT4 value or T3 value are given by the laboratory. The lab, by repeated research, they would say if the values fall within 0.3 to say 4.5 TSH, it is normal. If it is beyond the 4.5, it is abnormal, increased TSH. If it is less than 0.3, you say TSH is decreased. So those are obtained only by doing such sort of analysis only. So there won't be direct type 1, type 2 error for sensitivity and specificity, but nonetheless, you can work out the precision of your sensitivity and specificity and LR ratio using the statistical methods, and also do a little bit of analysis this way or that way of changing the cutoff value. And this is what is called ROC curve, receiver operating curve. Receiver operating curve shifts the cutoff value towards left and right and see how the sensitivity and specificity change. That's called the ROC curves. For those who are interested, I will show you what ROC curves are. Okay, let me see one more question. Sir, while doing calculations for the sample size during a thesis presentation, dissertation, can we mention the website? Yeah, very much. You can all see. What I'm going to do is I'll give you a standard statistical package website, not the one which I showed you. You can say we have done the sample size calculation using the following parameters, like this is the type 1 error, this is the type 2 error, this is my mu1, this is my mu2, these are means, and this is my standard deviation, this is my variation, and I have punched these numbers into this website and obtained this number. You can always say that. You don't have to do the calculation. Nobody expects the doctors to go through the calculation part of it. If you do it, nothing wrong, but you don't have to do it. You can just say, refer the website and punch those numbers. Anybody can verify from that website, punching those numbers, what you got is right or wrong. You can use that. I can give you the exact statistical package websites, which will be useful. Samantha has asked this question, and I hope I have answered. When we feed values into website to explain the final summary table type 1, and when we feed values in website questions, we feed D value of group A and what a group A and group, I didn't understand. Okay, the delta value you are looking at, supposing there are two groups, you have to take the delta between group A and group B. Supposing there are three groups, you have the delta value between A and C and A and B and B and C. So whichever you think is the most appropriate for your question, you use that delta for the calculation of samples. So in this example of ours, I would use the Horlicks with routine intervention by the mother as the difference, mu1 and mu2, and the difference between them I use. Because the milk group is in between and we may not really get a proper delta at that point. It depends on your question. What else? Anybody else? And I suggest to all of you, when you take up a dissertation, before you embark on the number of subjects you wanted to study, please don't decide arbitrarily. Give me the data. I'll let you know what will be your feasible sample size. Any other questions?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
The 3 more are remaining, sir. I have posted it.
Okay.
What is p-value? How to evaluate? That is the one, sir. Null hypothesis concept.
How to evaluate?
P-value.
P-value. What is p-value and how to evaluate p-value? Is that the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll again reiterate the concept. So, null hypothesis is when you say that there is no difference in the two groups you are studying, either treatment A or treatment B, Horlicks or no Horlicks, whatever you are using, the null hypothesis assumes that there is no difference between the groups you are comparing, maybe 2 or more groups. It may be proportions, it may be means also. When you have a mean, of course, you must have a standard deviation because simple mean will not tell me. So mean and standard deviation tells me about the distribution. So having said that, null hypothesis always presumes the groups you are comparing are same and there is no difference. As a researcher, you will be interested to refute the reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis of that A is different than B. A is better than B or worse than B. A and B are not same, either the proportion or the mean. That is the alternate hypothesis. Always the research, most of the research is tailored to reject the null hypothesis and accept the difference. Supposing we know that A and B are equal, we are not really interested to test it unless for some other reason, for adverse effects or for cost reason or for availability reason or for feasibility reason, we may do equality study. But studies of equality are 10% compared to studies of difference. So if difference is your aim, you will be always going into the area of rejecting the null hypothesis. You will not stick with the null hypothesis. Though you have started here, your ultimate aim is to reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. In doing so, you don't want to take any risk. You don't want to commit a big error. That error we are calling is 5% chance. By 5%, if I reject it, let me be wrong. I don't mind. But if I reject the null hypothesis, 95% of the time, I need to be certain that the difference is there in truth. How do I know the truth? To investigate the whole of that area, that community, that district, that state, or whatever it is. So we can never do the whole. So we always do a study. A study is a sample of the whole. When you do a sample from the whole, as I told you, there is a sampling error. That sampling error is what I am calling as my error of committing a mistake of saying these are different. If in fact they are true, let it be 5%, not more. Okay, so that is what exactly is called the alpha error or type 1 error. Type 2 error is the other way around, where in fact the treatments are two different things. If you do the whole, you know that A is not as the same as B. But your study concludes they are the same. You are not able to reject the null hypothesis. You are stuck with the null hypothesis and you are no way of rejecting the null hypothesis. In such a condition, you commit an error called the beta error that is pegged at 20%. Okay, let me accept the null hypothesis when in fact they are different, in truth they are different. Let me say they are no different with a confidence of 80% or a 20% error. That is the beta error. Usually we won't be committing the beta error because we are testing for the difference and not for the similarity. Supposing your study design itself is testing similarity between A and B, to choose one among the other, if both of them are equal, then you may choose one because of cost or whatever other factors. In such a scenario, your beta error should be very stringent, and you have to reduce it to 5% or 10% and not 20%. Okay, this is the basic concept. Now, what is p-value? P-value is what you obtain after the test is done. You apply a chi-square test or a t-test or a pair t-test or ANOVA or correlation or whatever are the test depending on the variable there. You would have done a test and come out with a p-value. This is the probability value of the error that you commit while rejecting the null hypothesis. P-value is the probability value of the error that one is committing when you reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. Let us say I concluded the study and I got a p-value of 0.4. That means if I reject the null hypothesis and accept the difference, I am committing an error of 40%, which could be a very huge error. I don't want to commit that. Because tomorrow this intervention, I am going to put it to my population, to my patients. So I don't want to take that. Let's say it is 0.2. Then also 20% chance is quite higher, 21 compared to a 5% chance. Let's say it is 5. The p-value is 0.05 or the error is 5%. Okay, that is the acceptable limit as far as the status. You can be 95% certain of the difference. 5% of the time, let it be, my error may be there. If it is less than 0.05, the better, because the p-value may be 0.02. That means you assumed that you wanted to accept 5%, but in fact you got 2% error. So lesser error is more acceptable. So I conclude that study is significant and then decide that the treatment A and B are separate, null hypothesis is null and void, and I go for the alternate hypothesis. Alpha error is what you decide before the test study is started. P-value is what you obtain with the data in hand. And the p-value has to be looked at whether it is crossing that 0.05 this side and is becoming significant, or is above 0.05 and becoming non-significant. Non-significant means null hypothesis cannot be rejected. Significant means null hypothesis will be rejected. The alternate hypothesis of difference will be accepted. But this statistical test should precede something called the clinical significance. If the clinical difference is not really great, whatever may be the statistical significance, it is of no use. So we don't do it at all. If there is no clinically visible difference between the two, if it is borderline case, we can test and see. But clinical significance is primary, statistical significance is mandatory to say one is working or not, one intervention works or not. Okay?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
The question is ANOVA concept.
What concept?
ANOVA concept.
ANOVA.
Yes,
ANOVA is
Yes, sir.
analysis of variance. When do you use variance? When you are dealing with quantitative data, isn't it? With qualitative data, we can't have any variance or standard deviation. Only when we are dealing with a quantitative data like height, weight, uric acid, blood pressure, heart rate, T-wave the number of millimeters of depression of ST, whatever may be the number, in such a case you have a sort of a number and it's the mean and the standard deviation. And variance is what is happening in the population, not in your study population, but in general. How do I know the variance of height in children among, say, let us 3 to 5 years? By looking at the literature, they will give you a nomogram. This will be the lowest normal. This will be the highest normal. Anything in between is accepted as normal. And that is the variance. So you pick up the variance, and analysis of variance is looking at the difference in sample 1 compared to sample mean 2 compared to sample mean 3. You have the Horlicks group, the second group and third group. More than 2 groups are there. If 2 groups are there, you use t-test. Whether paired, same individual examined twice is paired t-test. And not same individual, diabetics, hypertensives are compared, men and women are compared, the mean values, they're two different. So use a non-parity test. But if it crosses number of groups more than 2, then we do not know whether the difference is between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3 or 1 and 3. Isn't it? So whatever difference you are finding, what is the contribution of the p-value by the difference between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, or 3 and 1, whatever may be the, suppose you have 4 groups, and multiple, much more complicated. Suppose you have 10 groups, and the differences could be any. So the computerized software, there is a mathematical way also to calculate analysis of variance. So what it does, it takes the difference between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and tries to equate and see what exactly is the difference. Is there a difference or not? And that analysis of variance is the test of choice when you have a quantitative variable, when the data is parametrically distributed and the mean is, standard deviation is less than half of the mean. Number 3, when there are more than 3 groups. Okay. Now the question is, should I use a repeat ANOVA or should I use a regular ANOVA? That depends upon whether you are using repeat measurements on the same child or a same person, BP before and after treatment, or you are asking pain scale before giving the pain treatment and after receiving the painkiller. Whatever you are doing before, after, then you have a paired ANOVA, otherwise known as, it is called repeat sample ANOVA. If these are independent, then you use a plain ANOVA. Okay, that again gives you a p-value.
Sir, another question is, sir, can you please throw some light on paper presentation, poster presentation?
Table presentation for?
Paper presentation and poster presentation.
Yeah, how to write a paper. Paper presentation in a conference, paper presentation in a journal is an art. You can start doing it during the postgraduate period. I expect and I request you, also urge you to publish at least a couple of papers in the 3 years. It may not be very super papers, but you start doing it. And what are all you have to do it? First of all, your research question should be stated. It will have 4 or 5 sections. One section is what is your question. Second section is your study design and study population. The third one is what are your materials and methods, what measurements you are doing, at what intervals you are doing, and how did you standardize. Number 4 is what are the values that you got or your data that you have got and presented. And 5th is your analysis of the data using the statistical test, clinical and statistical significance, your p-value, confidence interval. And last is the conclusion. And 7th is the references. So write down here, number 1, a clearly stated question. Number 2, study design and study population. Number 3, materials and methods. Where do you study? Raghol Village, Vekagolam District, GEMS Hospital, outpatient, inpatient, or you go to the community. That is study population, age group, gender, and then what you do for the study population will be the methods. Material is whom you take for that. Sometimes you may not take patients, you may take lab samples. You may take samples from controls, you may take samples from the test patients, you may take samples from people who are affected and matched controls. You take unaffected people and then try to do a lab test. That's also valid. The material may be patients, maybe lab things, maybe X-rays, maybe anything that is clinically interesting. Then the methods is what exactly you do. You have to describe in no uncertain terms. People should understand what is being done. If you say I want to measure height, this is how you have measured. Whether you use inches or centimeters, what scale you used, how did you standardize, how you minimize your observer variation and things like that, and by a systematic error of the weighing machine, how did you calibrate the machine and all. That is the methods part. And when the methods part, you have to also say how frequently you do the measurements. And in the study population, when you are describing, you include not only the study design, randomization issues, number of people included, whether inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. Question, study design, including inclusion, exclusion there, and then the materials, people whom you are going to study, methods, how do you do it, and standardization. And 4 will be the observations or the data set, what you get out of the study. That you write another 2 paragraphs. What did you observe actually in group A, group B, group C? What are their proportions? What are their mean values? What is the standard deviation? What is the delta and all that? Having done that, you tabulate and report and put the data tabulation as we have seen today. And then you go on discussing whether the differences are useful, meaningful clinically first, then statistically, and whether your statistical test you have applied is correct one for the variable and for the situation which we have to. One thing is, what is the nature of the variable? Is it continuous or discrete, or continuous, qualitative or quantitative? 2, whether it's normally distributed or not. 3, whether it is independent groups or same groups. And 4, whether you're using mean or proportion. If you are using proportions, you have to use certain types of tests. If you are using means, you have to use another type of test. Supposing it is not normally distributed, then you can either take log values and make them normally distributed, or you can do non-parametric tests like Mann-Whitney U test or the Wilcoxon signed rank test and the Krishnan test. There are several non-parametric tests, but generally biological values are normally distributed. It is good for us. We don't have to go for non-normal distribution. Okay, now having done the statistical test, you get a p-value and a confidence interval. That you explain in the report. This is my p-value. In the discussion, you say similar studies have been done by elsewhere, some other persons, and they observed this much p-value for this much outcome. And my outcomes are comparable, not comparable. If comparable, it supports the research. If not comparable, you say why your population is it different from their population? What could be 1 or 2 reasons why the difference? That there is a concordance or discordance between your and their study. And ultimately, 3 or 4 lines about conclusion from this study. Never say, I have proved. Nobody can prove anything. Don't write the word, I have proved by this study. You have to prove by this study. You have to study the whole universe about this problem. If cilidepine and amlodipine are different or not, if I have to prove, I have to study everyone in the whole world, present, past, and future to arrive at that answer. Nobody can do that. You can say this study suggests, this study at best suggests. That's all only anybody can say. And of course, the p-value and other things you give. And always say there is further scope for research in this area. If you identify 1 or 2 areas or 3 areas which a further research will be feasible or interesting, you can say these areas, research in future research will be of great help. You can write that. So this is how you write a paper or a report. Paper writing to a journal is slightly different from paper writing for presentation in a conference, because in conference you are time bound, and so you have to give minimum details and ask them to get back to you on your website or on your link or somewhere to contact you for further details. Whereas in a journal article, you can be generally elaborate up to 5 to 8 pages they allow you, and within that you should be able to express it. And don't make the tables too complicated. Nobody will read complicated tables. So for example, I have shown you several slides. None of the tables look complicated. That is the way one can grasp and understand. If it is too complicated and so many numbers, so many confusing details are there in this one, they will not be able to analyze or look at that. And also do not collect data on the aspects of the patient information which you are not going to analyze. It's waste of time, waste of proforma. The shorter the proforma, the crisper the. You can write in the proposal itself, you can write, this is the null hypothesis, and that the treatment A is not equal to treatment B, and the alternate hypothesis is I would accept, will be interested only if A is better than B, or if B is better than A, or if either way. Sometimes you may be interested if A is better than B or B is better than A. Let's say I'm trying one drug versus placebo. I am not interested if placebo is better than the drug, isn't it? I won't be interested. Whereas I'm comparing 2 active interactions, A and B. I'll be interested to know if A is better or B is better. So that also you can bring it in your proposal, whether it is one-sided or two-sided. One-sided means you are interested only if it is better or worse, or the other way around is if you have either A is better or B is better, both are interesting. that you have to bring in null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis also you have to state, and also you have to state which test of significance you are interested to take and why. What test of significance you do for your statistical test and why, and what is your clinically significant difference also you have to mention in your proposal. I had a wonderful time talking to all you people, and each day is a learning experience. Each presentation and each way, each time you are questioned by the participants, it gives you some answers which you yourself never thought of in your mind. They come out of yourself. It is nice that we have interacted, and I have a proposal I discussed with our co-faculty as well as with the principal madam. I'm going to prepare a question paper for all of you. It will be a sort of part A and part B. Part B will be 5 problems. Each problem carries 10 marks. 5 problems will be 50 marks. And I don't think this is going to be your evaluation for your PG course or anything. This is for your own self-evaluation. The problems will be like calculate sensitivity, calculate specificity, calculate odds ratio, calculate sample size. Like that only the problems will be there. And another 25 multiple choice questions, each carrying 2 marks. They will be either multiple choice or true false or a matching. So I'll give 5 questions of matching and maybe around 10 true false and 10 multiple choices. Total 25 into 2, 50 marks, and 50 marks for the problems, and 50 plus 50, 100 marks. Time is at your disposal. There's no time limit. You don't have to answer in 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. From Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 full days you take. And this is with books. You have your PDFs I have given you, the videos I have given you, the discussions we did, and the proposal discussion we did, and any other resource you consult and come out with an answer for that question paper. Say by Thursday sometime you submit it to your faculty, and your faculty, 4 of them are there. They will take 25% of each one of your answers as a caregiver, and they will receive the answers, and they would have had a so-called key as per the this person, and that key they will apply on your answers and give you the scoring. And we will meet on one more occasion for an hour or 2 and discuss those questions to make your understanding clear. And we are not going to say that Dr. X has got this mark, Dr. Y has got this mark, but we will give you a distribution of your scores. How many has got them? If it is I expect it will be a normal distribution. There will be a mean score, and there will be some people who did better on this side, less on the other side, and I will show you the data on that. This is the proposal I had, and principal madam has agreed for that, and my co-faculty have also concurred with that. Now, don't think that you are being examined or anything. This is only for your own improvement. I give you 5 problems and 25 multiple choice questions. Answer them at your convenience in the next 3 days. By Monday, the question paper will be with Dr. Sajid Patnaik as well as Dr. Samta madam and Samina madam, and they will be in charge of you. And who is responsible to each one of those faculties? Right now you can pick it up and divide them into 4 groups and then take it. And we will probably meet with the permission of principal madam. We'll find a time maybe next Saturday or next Monday. Maybe we'll sit down maybe next Monday or Tuesday. In the morning hours around 10, 11 o'clock, we will sit down and then answer those questions online, and also look at, you can compare your own answers, and it will be a self-evaluation for you. Okay? You don't like? Good. So, okay, very nice that all of you are clapping. So, nice to be encouraged by you people. Once again, congratulations and thanks for all of you for undergoing this tortuous and rigorous and intense focus on 6 days sitting with the faculty and listening to the presentations, and God helps you in better understanding. And I only hope that we are instrumental in furthering your knowledge. And again, the bottom line is use me for any of your requirements, either in clinical medicine or in medical research. With these few words, let me bid adieu for you till next week, and the questions will be with your faculty, question paper.